Today's video is brought to you by our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom. You can get all the Dominaria United cards you need and help support the show over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it is time for a super special video. So Dominaria United is completely out. Set releases shortly, but we got the full spoiler, which means it's time to shift gears. Start talking about what cards in the set can actually make an impact on various constructed formats. For the next few days, I'm going to be joined by Crim, probably better known as the Asian Avenger. How are you, Crim?
I'm good. Excited because it's a brand new set, so that means it's not only just any set, it's also going to be a big rotation. So,
It's Christmas. It's Christmas for standard players. We get rotation, everything is brand new, everything seems possible. Always my favorite set release of the year when we have standard rotation, and we have a pretty sweet list of standard cards today. We're going to be counting down our top 10 standard cards from Dominaria United, and like usual with these top 10s, Crim and I each made a list, and then we kind of mash it together. You can see our individual lists in the in the article over on the website, but I wanted to mention each of us had 2 cards on our individual list that didn't actually make our final top 10 list. For me, it was King Darien, the 48th was the big one that didn't quite sneak in. Yeah, the 48th King Darien, which I think is a pretty good card, but didn't quite make it. Crim, I know you had a couple that didn't actually make the list. What were the ones that you had that didn't make our final top 10?
Okay, so I had Evolved Sleeper, and I had Urtai the Resurrected. Yeah, that was it. Those 2.
Yeah, so most of them, there's a lot of agreement. So overall, most of our cards ended up making the list, but those were the ones that didn't quite make it. Anyway, I guess we should probably jump right into it and start counting down our top 10 cards from Dominaria United for Standard. And number 10 on our list, we got a human 3-drop, a human cleric 3-drop, an anointed peacekeeper. Crim, I know this is one that you like quite a bit for Standard. So what are you picturing from this new taxing human?
Well, depending on how good mono white and all that is going to be moving into the new standard, assuming that we still have Midnight Hunt and whatnot, and whatever the adversaries are, I assume it's got to be an archetype still. So Anointed Peacekeeper is a 2 mana and a white vigilant. Enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Spells your opponent's cast with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. So this is kind of like a elite spellbinder. It doesn't fly, but it is vigilant and a 3/3, so it actually does combat quite well. And yeah, this kind of fills that void of the 3-drops. Although white hasn't had an issue with 3-drops, or at least lacking in the 3-drop department. However, this is just something that's good against attacking the opponent's tempo and whatnot, delaying their plays, and kind of like what Spellbinder did. Except for this one also has ability, let's say if they do find the mana to play the Planeswalker or whatever, it costs them 2 more mana to also activate it. So I like this as a good way to slow down a good amount of control decks, mid-range decks, and whatnot game plan.
Yeah, this one's interesting. For me, this one, it was in consideration for my list. It didn't make the list. I think it's a good card, and I do think the, Paulo at home or Elite Spellbinder at home is a pretty good comparison for it. My main concern is there's just, so many good white 3-drops. Can this beat out Adeline and Brutal Cathar and Extraction Specialist and Wedding Announcement and Welcoming Vampire? The list is just so long. So I think this is a card that has a power level that is high enough for it to see play, and I like what it does. I just don't know what the mix is going to look like. So it could be one of those really good cards that ends up not seeing that much play. Not because it's bad, just because there's so many cards that it's competing with. And it probably depends on what the metagame looks like, what your specific white aggro build looks like. What are you going to value more? Are you going to value more power from something like Adeline, or better removal for something like Brutal Cathar? Against Control, though, or Super Friend style decks, this is probably one of the better options because of its taxing, almost like bad Meddling Mage mixed with bad Pithy Needle style of effect. It does offer a lot of value, but I'm just kind of in wait and see mode to see what the meta looks like and what 3-drop is going to rise to the top for white decks in Standard.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely an issue with where white is with 3, but they do play them. Like they just have them out in the sideboard. Like they have 4 elite spellbinders in the sideboard, or maybe they, like you had mentioned, choose to put it in the main instead. Yeah. But like, yeah, oftentimes the like mono white deck is just like stacked. I thought like we're looking at like, let's just take a look at one of the first lists right here. You've already got about like 13 3-drops. The deck is like 13 3-drops. So
there's so many 3-drops. I will say I think it's quite a bit worse than Elite Spellbinder just because of the body. Like a 3/1 flyer, I've died to Paulo many times. Like that, if you don't have a flyer to deal with that or don't have removal, it's actually a pretty good clock. Anointed Peacekeeper, I think its ability might be stronger than Elite Spellbinder's ability because it does work with things on the battlefield and in your opponent's hand. But as far as actually like beating your opponent down, a 3/3 ground creature, much less intimidating, I would say, than a 3/1 flyer.
But in a meta where we have a vigilance is actually extremely important because Wandering Emperor is one of like the best things that you could be doing in a lot of like mid-range to control decks that have white, including in the mirror match if they bring in Wandering Emperor. This won't get got by that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, definitely it'll be sweet to see where this card ends up in Standard because it is a good one. Let's move on to number 9 on our list. We have a card that's a 3-drop in a different color that I'm pretty high on, and that is Haughty Djinn. Haughty Djinn reminds me of some cards from Magic's past. It is literally Enigma Drake, which saw some play in Standard. Also reminds me of Tempest Djinn, the mono blue Djinn, which saw play in the last Dominaria Standard. And then you also get a Baral Goblin Electromancer spell cost reduction ability on it. For me, when you add all these things together, and you consider Delver still in Standard, we still have Ledger Shredder in Standard, these other kind of like blue spell slingery theme flyers, I think that Haughty Djinn has a chance to be pretty good as a finisher in some sort of like blue, mono blue, maybe blue X tempo style deck, where this can get really, really big, really, really fast, as we've seen with cards like Enigma Drake or Crackling Drake. But I'm curious, Grim, what do you think about this one? You're a blue mage. What do you think about Haughty Djinn in Standard?
I think that this card is like not nearly as powerful as the Djinn in Blue Devotion was. Only because like when we come to like power level, but I do like the spell reduction on it. So I think that's where it makes up for it. However, I don't know, like this, like I'm looking at this card and it looks like it's going to be in a blue black or maybe blue white tempo deck. There's a few like there's Protect the Negotiators that looks like it's pushing a blue white like kind of tempo deck, but blue black will have like a few other spells, and I think we still have Poppet Stitcher, so a spells matter kind of like tempo deck with Delver. I think it's there, right? Like I think this is like decent. This is another card that just narrowly missed out on my list. So it looks fun, but I don't know. We'll have to see. I like this one. It was one of the ones where I felt a little shakier on.
Yeah, I think it also benefits a little bit from just the kicker spells. We got a lot of good kicker spells, and that, I think, allowed Wizards to drop the cost on some of the spells. But then if you kick them, they get really powerful. I know there's one coming up later in our list that would go really well in some sort of blue-black Haughty Djinn deck. So, I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. There's also is a lot of graveyard hate in Standard, and this is an Enigma Drake rather than a Crackling Drake. So, it's only growing based on the cards that are in your graveyard. So, if your stuff's getting sniped from your graveyard, it's going to be hard to make this get super, super big. I think there's enough support for it, but we'll have to wait and see. A little bit of a speculative pick coming in at number 9, but let's move on to number 8 on our list. We got another blue 3-drop. This is a one that I think you like, Crim. Voldalen Mindsinger, a new merfolk wizard that can maybe yoink a creature. Starts off pretty small, but if you can kick it for red or green mana, it gets some counters, and you get to steal something with its power less than Voldalen Mindslinger's power. So, Crim, what are you thinking about this one in Standard?
Well, first off, I'm thinking how humor it is that on our spreadsheet that we have typed up, that first name is typed 3 different ways.
Yeah, that's probably on me, and I. Yeah,
but yes, I think that it is a wonderful card.
I type like I talk. I'll probably say it in 3 different ways too. So
I cannot wait to hear you pronounce this 9 different ways to find a new way to pronounce it. But yes. So hold on. See, now you've got me pronouncing the mythical L that isn't there. It's Vodal. Okay, Vodal. Oh my God, Vodalian Mindsinger.
Nailed it.
Vodalian Mindsinger, Oh my god, that was so much harder than it needed to be. Is a sweet tempo card, right? Like we've already seen that there looks like there's going to be some kind of Merfolk deck at some point. If not now, then at least when Ixalan hits. And on top of that, this is kind of like a Threads of Loyalty, right? Like this reads like just like a Threads of Loyalty on a body, which could make it more of a liability as opposed to an enchantment. But the fact here is that this is a sweet tempo play. Like being able to just drop down and you can kick it numerous times. You can steal something with 3 or less power. And when you're looking at a lot of the cards that I'm thinking of that like kind of like are important, it's nice to know that I can just steal a good amount of bodies here. I won't get to steal a lot of like the 4/4s and 4 unless I kick it like 100 times. But when you look at like a lot of Dominaria stuff, we're looking around roughly 3 or less power unless we're talking about the Defilers, right? So like we're even talking about like down to like some of the Angels are like around 3 or less power. So you could steal those as well.
Yeah, I think this one's going to come down to being able to kick it. Like, if you just cast it, you can steal something with 1 power, which could be okay in the right matchup, but a little bit limited. Once you kick it once, then you can kind of steal quite a bit, and you're getting a 4/4. And if you end up in a teamer deck and can double kick it, and I think if you really want to make this work, because of triomes and so forth, you can make the mana cost actually work on this, then you're kind of stealing pretty much anything and getting a pretty big body out of it. It reminds me a little bit of Mind Flayer from Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, except the upside of this is you actually get a much more legitimate body out of it if you can kick it. Like, a 5 mana 4/4 or a 7 mana 6/6, that's not bad, especially if you're stealing one of your opponent's things along the way.
Let's not forget though that we have Lord effects. Just saying. So like that,
but we also only have like 4 Merfolk in Standard or something.
We have 4 Merfolk. So like right now, it may not be like right out the gates. I would play it as a sweet sideboard card, right, for low to the ground, go wide decks. It's a solid way for you to steal their stuff. But then once we actually get real Merfolk decks and like we start like accounting for like lords and things like that, I think this card is going to be even better.
Yeah, I think that's true. This one for me, I think short term, I think it has uses, like you said, out of the sideboard, especially if you are in colors that can kick it at least once or preferably twice. Long term, I would be surprised if we didn't have a good Merfolk deck, and it does interact well with Lords because then you don't have to kick it as much and you can still steal big things. This is a card I think almost might even have like a shot in Modern Merfolk as like a fringe card, but if you think about like a Modern Merfolk deck that just stacks up so many Lords, even if you're just casting this for 3 mana, it's going to be like a 4/4 or something, and that actually opens up a range of stealing a bunch of different creatures. So if we get to the point where we can do that in Standard, then this becomes even more exciting. If you don't have to spend 6 mana on it to steal a big creature because you're buffing it in other ways. I guess it also interacts with like Wedding Announcement, King Darren. Yep. There's other Anthem effects. I don't know how you make the mana work for something like that. You're heading to like the 4-color territory there. But any way to pump its power other than kicking it is going to be a nice bonus with this card for sure. Let's keep moving on. Next on our list, we have a 2-drop that I want your opinion on, Crim. This is one I'm really high on. I've been digging through the cards that are going to be legal in Standard after rotation, and I feel like this is either the best or the second best green 2-drop that we have in the format. I think Gala Greeters is still going to be really good. The treasure production is really nice, but I think that this might be, in a weird way, like a Luminarch Aspirant replacement for decks that really care about this effect. So it starts off as a 2/2, but when you cast a creature spell, it gets bigger, and then if it dies, you get to put its counters on other things. So I'm envisioning this could be a good 2-drop in just like a mono green creature stompy deck. We got like the Defiler of Vigor, which also works with counter synergies. We got these big green creatures. This seems just like a fine 2-drop on your curve in a deck like that. And then we still have like Modify going on in the format. We've seen some Modify deck with like Thundering Kaju and Kadama the West Tree being pretty good. This curves really well into Kadama the West Tree, and then you hit them and you start ramping and get lands. So I think this card's actually really good. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it though, so I'm curious what your take is on Quirion Beastcaller for Standard.
In a format where everything is exile and or soon to be another sweet tempo play like Fading Hope and whatnot, I think this is just not that good. Like it just doesn't do enough.
I mean, like, Luminarch Aspirant play though. Like, isn't this very much?
You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to do like example. I can just play. I can just play it. Go to combat step. Get a counter. Right. That's much better than just having to Kyrian Beastcaller, wait a turn, cast something, have it target, like have the ability trigger, and then they could just in response shock, bounce, exile, do numerous other things.
But I mean, this starts off as a 2/2. So Luminarch Aspirant getting the counter on it is a 2/2. This is also a 2/2. So it kind of, I mean, I guess the problem is if you can't cast creatures ever, that would be bad. But assuming that you're a deck that has a lot of creatures, it seems like this is just going to scale relatively similar to Luminarch Aspirant.
But Luminarch Aspirant can also come down and move a counter elsewhere.
That's true. So this doesn't do that immediately, right? Yeah, you gotta, if this is gonna move counters, it's gonna be after it dies. Like, so you're not moving counters to other things right away. That's true.
Aspirant is like good late and early. On 2, it pumps itself. On like 3, it could pump something else, right? So I don't know. I like the fact that I don't have to cast anything at all to get Aspirant to work. That's why I think that card is much better. It's like this card, it could be pretty good, like, but it just seems like it's going to take a lot more to get this one going.
So I don't know if it's, I don't know if I would say it is as good as Luminarch Aspirant, but I think if you just look at the green 2-drops, I think this is going to be like one of the winners just by default, more or less, because unlike white 3-drops or whatever, where you have like a million really good options, for playable green 2-drops, I couldn't find a lot that I thought was actually like really on this level as far as being playable. So I guess we'll see how it shakes out. I like those little extra synergies with Modify and whatnot, but we'll have to wait and see. So interesting 2-drop, at least in my opinion, for green. But let's keep moving on. We're getting to the realm of cards that I think we both agree on are probably going to be good. Starting with number 6 on our list, which is a simple little removal spell in Rona's Vortex. This is a pretty draw-go-y style card. Crim, why don't you tell us what you envision with this one in Standard?
I mean, Rona's Vortex is just, it's good in like draw go. It's good in like, you know, tempo, except for like, you can't bounce your own thing. But yeah, so for 1 blue mana, kicker is 2 and a black. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. If the spell was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. What? What? Dude, no, what? This is absurd. You can straight up hard tuck a creature or planeswalker for 4 mana if you wanted to. And the versatility of it also just being a 1 mana unsummon on your opponent's creature or planeswalker. I think this, like, the uncommons in this set are busted. Like, I would almost have like in my top 10 list be a ton of uncommons, to be honest with you. Like I think this card is like wildly good. So it doesn't allow you to like bounce back to your own hand like Fading Hope and then Scry. So it won't be able to protect your own stuff from removal. But the ability to just tuck anything, any creature or planeswalker for 4 mana, I think this is huge. This card is huge, right?
It's very, very good at 4 mana for sure. Like, if you're guessing this at 4 mana, it's pretty much hard removal at instant speed, which is nice. And then you're getting some flexibility where the bounce mode, not like as good as Fading Hope, because like you said, you can't save your own creatures with it, but it can hit planeswalkers, which is somewhat relevant. And we do have a lot of good planeswalkers. It seems like Super Friends is almost an archetype that Wizards might be pushing. We have some like sagas for Super Friends and like Broker's Ascendancy for Super Friends. So it feels like there's going to be some good planeswalkers in the Standard. So I like this card quite a bit. As a early game, like, you really want to be casting it for 4 mana. That's how I view this, is like, ideally this is 4 mana instant speed, murder a creature or planeswalker. Putting it on the bottom is really the same as killing it. And then you have this 1 mana like get out of jail free card. If things are going really bad, you can use this to slow down an aggro deck, or if you don't have the mana valuable, save yourself from lethal damage. But yeah, I think this card is one of the better unsummon effects that we've really ever seen, in all honesty, thanks to just how powerful being able to tuck something at instant speed is, even for 4 mana.
I would argue that this might be the best unsummon, because you just don't have an unsummon that is able to bounce like for the versatility in 1 blue and like whatnot just makes it one of the best. Of course, you can't protect your own thing, but there's got to be a downside, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely in the conversation. It might just be the best unsummon effect for sure. And I think we'll see a lot of this card in standard. Anything that's interested in playing instant speed, any tempo decks or control decks, I think this card's going to be very, very strong in those decks for sure. So, and like you said, the uncommons in this set overall, I think this is the best uncommon probably, or my pick for best uncommon, but there are many very playable uncommons in this set. I was kind of blown away just like how good the uncommons were overall.
Yeah, you can make an argument for some of the other stuff too. So yeah, banger of a card. And again, I don't know how prominent it'll be, but things going to the graveyard is usually not the worst thing for opponents. So it tucking, once again, very important.
Well, let's move on into our top 5. Number 5 on our list. We're going from a little uncommon up to a big mythic in Shivan Devastator. A single red and X to get a massive hasty flyer. This card's very weird to me because it's one of those cards that not super efficient at any point on the curve, but the combination of flying and haste and the flexibility of it being okay at any point on the curve and just being an absurd finisher off the top when it's like turn 10 and you're battling back and forth and then you just peel this and cast it as like an 8/8 hasty flyer to close out the game, I think makes this card really, really strong. One of the better dragons and definitely one of the best hydras that we've seen in quite a while. I think ramp decks for sure. This is going to be an all-star. What do you think about this outside of ramp decks, Crim? Like, how much of a staple do you think this will be in our new standard format?
So I'm glad. First off, I think it was when it was revealed on the podcast. It was like you and Richard that weren't high on it. Now I'm glad you both are. I hope Richard understands and sees this, but I know Richard was extra hard on it. I think this card is sweet, which is funny because I think you have it higher on your list than I do. This card was such a haymaker. Already you knew no matter what it would scale. At the very worst, it would be like the going rate of what you already have now, except for obviously Goldspan Dragon was absurdly cracked in numerous different ways. But the fact that I can make this a 5 mana 4/4 haste, right? That's the going rate of every every red dragon so far, right? Between and in the history. But the beauty in it is that it scales. And and let's say if you're like me, you either draw all lands, it's great then, or you draw 3 lands. Maybe you need that haster, that just 3 land that's just, you get a 2/2 that just can immediately swing in the air. This card is good at all points of the game of whenever you need it. So I really like this dragon.
I think I've come around to viewing this dragon as kind of like a charm, where I think it's actually okay at all points in the game. It doesn't excite, a Goldspan Dragon that isn't making me tokens is not that exciting to me, or a 3 mana 2/2 flying haste, that's not that exciting to me. At any point on the curve, I'm not excited by this card, but the fact that this can fill my curve at any point that I need it to, and I do think is just a legitimately awesome finisher when you have a ton of mana. That's what excites me about this card. So even though I'm kind of a little sad to cast it, no matter what mana value I'm casting it at, other than enough mana to haste and kill you on the spot, then I'm pretty happy if I'm just one-shotting you with this card. But the fact that it's pretty good or close enough to good at every point on the curve, that's why I've come around to liking this card. For me, it's all about the flexibility, because I still don't think it's super great at any point. If you compare it to a Goldspan that doesn't do any of the good things that Goldspan does, is that really actually exciting?
You can't compare it to Goldspan, dude. That card was broken. And the best part is that we knew that. We even knew that in spoiler season. We talked about how absurd Goldspan was, and it played even better.
But I imagine,
it's not fair, dude.
I mean, but even picture this. We have the Teferi, the untapped stuff, and we have that horrible new Lotus that makes a ton of mana. I think there's just going to be ridiculous decks where it's you tap the Lotus, make 5, untap it with Teferi, make 5 more, cast this as a 12/12 flying haste, and you're just you kill people. People just straight up die. And in mono red, you're right. It is something you can do early in the game. One of the downsides of Inferno of Star Mounts or whatever, which is a big hasty finisher like this, if you do get stuck on mana and you're getting pressured by an aggro deck, you don't have the option to run that out as a 2/2 to block for a turn, or maybe trade with some aggro creature against mono white or something. That's something that Shivan Devastator can do, and I think that's what makes it actually a pretty exciting card. I imagine this card's gotta see play somewhere, right? There's no way this card can just be bad.
Yeah, I don't, there's just no way. Like, it's somewhere for sure in the 75, but as of right now, like, looking at what Standard's got, it feels like main deck.
Yeah.
Like, everybody needs to remember, too, that, like, the power level of going into this new Standard is going to be a significant drop because we are losing out on, like, 3 or 4 other sets. So, right now, the power level, this is going to be one of the more powerful cards.
Well, let's keep moving on and talking about more powerful cards, like the most hyped reprint from Dominaria United, which is Liliana of the Veil. Liliana of the Veil, it has been a long time, more than a decade since it's been in Standard, but I feel like it's probably going to be pretty good this time around. Modern All-Star. Crim, what are you picturing with this new, well, not new, but new to Standard 3-mana Planeswalker in Standard?
Well, first off, Seth, on my list, I had Karn here because I think Karn.
I ignored that. I blocked that out of my mind. What card is that? That card doesn't exist.
Karn living trash can is the reason why I had Karn so high up was because you can pitch it to Liliana.
That is the best use of Karn, I think.
Yeah, exactly. No, like Lily looks like, okay, first off, looking at this, you already saw me have Evolved Sleeper, right? There's actually what looks to be a pretty solid, at least mono, like, there's a lot of good black cards. I know there's no control. Gary. Yeah, there's no Gary right now to, like, kind of, like, pay off for all the devotion and pips and whatnot. But I'm telling you, I think Lily and like, there's got to be some kind of good black mid-range deck out there, black-based, and it's going to have some of these cards. And Lily, this time around, looks like she's going to be way better than when she originally was on the first Innistrad. Because when she was on the first Innistrad, that card was actually kind of, like, bad to, like, meh. I mean, like, I never liked playing it. And I played the mid-range decks back then, and it just wasn't that good. But now in this format, I think she might actually have a home.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of support cards. From what I remember last time, Liliana was at her best in some sort of reanimator deck, like Solar Flare or whatever, where you're trying to, like, use it to fill your graveyard was probably, like, the shining moment of Liliana. But just playing it in, like, a random mid-range deck, I don't remember it being all that good the first time around. But this time around, like, you can see the curve is already built. Like, you got Tenacious Underdog at 2 or Blood Tithe Harvester if you want to be 2 colors. You got Liliana into Sorin the Mirthless is really gone and is really strong. And then, even though we don't have Gary, like, Invoke Despair is kind of a busted follow-up in a mono black deck. So I'm just imagining, like, you know, this curve out, make you discard cards, attack your hand, and just play really good black cards. And Liliana seems just perfect. One of the upsides of Liliana is it's one of those cards that's good against control because you can attack the control player's hand, and then it's good against creature decks for the most part because you can use the Edict mode, and the ultimate isn't that hard to get to. Census comes down at 3 mana, especially if you're some sort of removal heavy deck. It's not that unrealistic that you can plus Liliana a few times and actually get to the ultimate. Like, Liliana is probably the Planeswalker I see ultimate most often in a format like Modern. So I think Liliana is going to be pretty good this time around.
It's also the Planeswalker I see alt incorrectly the most often.
That is right. That is true.
Outside of interface things, like I'm talking about the piles, like the piles that are given. This card is back when Planeswalkers weren't just like the easy, you know, like we had mentioned this on the podcast, the easy just, snowball win the game, alt win the game. Lily actually requires you to make decisions. Like, it's not strictly correct to plus, right? Like there are times where it may feel weird, but you just don't do anything.
Yeah, it definitely is a skill testing Planeswalker, which I think is part of the fun. Like, it's going to be interesting to see a new generation of Magic players who maybe were not even playing Magic back when Innistrad come out, or maybe haven't played Modern because it's not a Magic Arena, and learn what it's like to play with Liliana of the Veil. So definitely a super exciting reprint for sure.
Also, she was in Standard last time when Lingering Souls was around. So it's like, plus, okay, I throw Lingering Souls away.
She was good with Lingering Souls. So you can throw your own Lingering Souls away, but having a Lingering Souls really minimizes the impact of Lily in a bunch of ways. It's also just like so many creatures to sacrifice, and we don't have anything like that this time. So I think Liliana should be better than her first run in Standard for sure.
Exactly. Like you won't have to worry about Lingering Soul, people just like pitching a Think Twice. God, I missed that card. And then the creature lands aren't in standard anymore. So remember that. So like there are like your planeswalkers feel a little bit safer than they did before.
Although there is a lot of removal that can hit planeswalkers now, which is maybe the downside.
Sure.
Back in 2011, you didn't really have the Void Wrens and so forth as much. So you're just like, hey, snipe your planeswalker. But still, I mean, Liliana is only 3 mana, so even if someone spends a removal spell on it, it's not the end of the world. You're probably like coming out mana neutral a lot of the time in that exchange anyway. So anyway, let's keep moving forward. Number 3 rather on our list. We got a big green worm, Defiler of Vigor, and this one just cracks me up because they printed a whole cycle of these Defiler cards, and this is just like so far above everything else in that cycle. I mean,
Seth,
everything
no,
about
no,
this.
No. You're doing the card a disfavor. Okay, you're doing it a disservice. There are, I like to say it as there's the Defilers and there's the Defiler Vigor. It's not a part of the same cycle. It's not a part of the same cycle.
It's in a league all of its own, for sure. I mean, so the exciting thing about this card, all of these cards work the same. They give you this Phyrexian mana cost reduction, which is nice. They do something when you cast a permanent of their color, which is nice. The thing about Defiler of Souls is it's a 5 mana 6/6 trample. So you're already starting at like a really legitimate base. Like, those are big stats. So even though this doesn't necessarily do anything right away, we've seen like Elder Gargaroth become a very strong card. I don't know if it's fair to even compare this, but that just has such a big trampling body that if you can't deal with it, it's going to take over the game really quickly. And then if you do untap with this and you got some cards left in hand, you start putting counters on your entire team, including this Defiler of Vigor, which is quickly going to be a 8/8 trample, a 9/9 trample. Plus it just lets you dump your hand really quickly if you got some life to spend because of this Phyrexian mana ability. My only concern with this card, my little concern, is there is like Ren in 7 still, which is pretty good. They spoiled that Ape. Workshop Warchief is a decent 5-drop. So there are a few options in the 5-drop slot, but if you're playing some sort of mono green deck where you're going to be able to trigger this with a green permanent pretty consistently, I think this is a very, very standard playable card. But Crim, what do you think about Defiler Vigor from its 1-card cycle, apparently?
Yeah, it's the only card in its own league, you know, like the other Defilers are Defiler for sure. They hang out together. But this card is just good on it's good on rate right there. 5 mana 6/6 trample. Obviously everything else once you start tacking that on there, like it's not I think it doesn't look flashy. It doesn't also like walk your dog or do anything like that. Like but it just does it's very good at what it does. It just boosts, it loves it, like green wants that. And this is a solid 5-drop. And though Ren and 7's in the format, I don't think I like Silverback Elder, but I think Silverback Elder is something that I probably want, maybe as a sideboardy thing, right? I mean, I do like Silverback Elder a lot, but Defiler just keeps growing. The mana reduction is better. I just like that a lot more. I value that higher.
And Trample's what puts me over the edge with this card compared to some of the other options. Plus, like we mentioned a little bit before, there still are +1/+1 counter synergies, modified stuff. Not that this card needs to have synergies to really be good. Like, I think you just play this as a top end in a mono green card. But I could imagine there being decks that can take even more advantage of the +1/+1 counters than some other decks where it'll probably be very good there as well. So, yeah, big old green creature, green, pretty good color in standard these days.
Yeah. Green stomp, green smash, that's it, right? And it's good at doing it, which is what it should be good at doing, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that is traditionally what green's very good at, so it feels like a very good green card, a traditional green card, but Let's move on. Number 2 on our list. We were high on Liliana for standard, but we're even higher on another planeswalker, Jaya Fiery Negotiator, which just has a ridiculous amount of abilities. It's got 4 abilities. It protects itself with tokens. It generates cards advantage. It removes things. If you ever ultimate it, you're going to get a bunch of copies of your instants and sorcery spells. To me, this feels like exactly what you want in a standard playable planeswalker. Removal, protection, card advantage. That's like the Ob Nixilis formula. The traditional, like, we want to make a planeswalker that's pretty good. Stick those things on it. Plus, as an added bonus, you get the token with the plus ability, which is something else that correlates pretty highly with playable planeswalkers. If you look at planeswalkers that have plus abilities that make tokens, those are often very, very good in standard, because not only you're protecting your planeswalker with the token, you're protecting it while growing its loyalty and working towards the ultimate or working towards whatever you want to do with it. So I think Jaya is going to be one of the better planeswalkers in standard. But Crim, what do you think?
Yeah, like, it's got 4 abilities, like you had mentioned, and the token isn't just any token. It's a 1/1 token with prowess. So, like, these tokens are, like, it's got a little bit of a monastery mentor love attached to it, right? So, yeah. And it comes down where, as opposed to, like, the Ob Nixilis, kind of like the vanilla 5-drop planeswalker, this is a 4-drop. So this is a very, very solid cost for what it's doing. And the abilities give it a lot of versatility. This card just seems really good. It feels almost like it's not quite Chandra Torch of Defiance, but it is still very good for standard.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. I think it's the closest we've seen to a Chandra Torch of Defiance on Chandra. I don't think it's as good as Chandra, but I don't think we've had another planeswalker that has been close to Chandra since we got Chandra several years ago. And Jaya's like, it's the closest that we've gotten. I think the Prowess token is interesting because I think this card is fine in like a control deck, a mid-range deck. It's just like a good planeswalker, but we also do have kind of a Spellslinger theme coming from Dominaria United in standard, where you have like Belmore to pump your stuff. We got a new like ground Spite Dragon creature that gets counters whenever you cast an instant or sorcery with like the pseudo prowess. So maybe this could be the top end of like a burn deck or some sort of like Is It Spellslinger style deck, which would be pretty interesting. We haven't had archetype like that in standard. So I think that Jaya it's very high on our list because it's got a whole bunch of potential homes, from Super Friends to Control to the top end of aggro / prowess style decks.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to number 1 on our list. We have Flying Loris, essentially. Seraph Paragon can't be your companion, but works a lot like a Loris as a 4-mana 3/4 flyer that lets you cast something mana value 3 or less, permanent spells only, or land from your graveyard each turn. This card to me feels like, I think this is just the best card in the set for standard. That's why it's number 1 on the list. So much value. We saw Loris be the best card in the history of Magic, and it's not fair to make the comparison to Loris, because part of the reason Loris is so good is it can be your companion, but this has much better stats. Like a 3/4 flyer for 4, that's on curve. That's like Restoration Angel. Those are not embarrassing stats to have on your creature. And then if this stays on the battlefield, you are quickly just going to overwhelm your opponent with graveyard value. It's drawing you a card essentially each turn from your graveyard. I think this is like the top end of mono white decks. You got to have a lot of permanents, a lot of cheap permanents, so you're not going to play this in Control most likely, I don't think. But if you got a bunch of cheap permanents, I feel like this is just a great way to top your curve in standard. But what do you think about the new Angel, Crim?
Hey, yeah, anything that is playing a load of 3 or less drops, this is going to be in there. This is just like an auto include. Good stats, 4 cost, by the way. Angels are getting cheaper, by the way. And this is kind of absurd. I think this card is amazing. Like we're talking, and like you can get a land at the very least, right? So, if there ever becomes more like fetching like involved with like any of the not Dominaria, the last plane, the Streets of Capenna stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like you can start bringing those back. I value my deck thinning, and then on top of that, pulling out more lands, getting like just always hitting your land drops if you at the very worst. But obviously, you're able to bring back your threats, like your Intrepid Adversary, which is once again the ability is triggered on ETB, so you can just play it again and then pay 2 again and then pump the team again, right? So like this looks like a very powerful threat on a very evasive, powerful body.
And it's any permanent mana value 3 or less. So this can also be getting back your Kaidos. It can be getting back your Lilianas. Like, this is getting Planeswalkers too. There's so many strong cheap permanents in Standard that I expect we're going to be seeing Sarah Paragon in a lot of places. And if you're worried about it dying, which is a concern, you just run this out on turn 4, your opponent kills it, you get no value out of it. You can do the like Tireless Tracker trick, or even the Luris trick. A lot of times you would see people play Luris off curve so they could immediately play something. So you can play this on 5, have a mana available to make a 1-drop from the graveyard, or worst case, make a land drop from your graveyard. So then you get that value right away, and then at least even if it dies, you're still up on cards in that exchange. So I think this card is so good.
Yeah.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of our top 10 Dominaria United cards for Standard. So Crim, thanks for hanging out and doing it. It is always a blast.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Pioneer. In the meantime, while you're waiting for the Pioneer top 10, make sure to let us know what you're most hyped to play in our new post-rotation Dominaria United Standard. This set's really good. There's so many other cards that were on the cusp of being in my top 10 list, so we probably missed something sweet. Let us know what you're hyped for in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the top 10 Dominaria United cards for Pioneer.